The Basilica of St Denis is a large medieval abbey church in the city of St Denis, now a northern suburb of Paris. The building is of unique importance historically and architecturally, as its choir, completed in 1144, is considered to be the first Gothic church. The site originated as a Gallo-Roman cemetery in late Roman times. The archeological remains still lie beneath the cathedral. The people buried there seem to have had a faith that was a mix of Christian and pre-Christian beliefs and practices. Around 475, St Genevieve purchased some land and built St Denis de la Chapelle. In 636, on the orders of Dagobert I, the relics of St Denis, a patron saint of France, were reinterred in the basilica. The relics of St Denis, which had been transferred to the parish church of the town in 1795, were brought back again to the abbey in 1819. The basilica became a place of pilgrimage and the burial place of the French kings, with nearly every king from the 10th to the 18th centuries being buried there, as well as many from previous centuries. St Denis soon became the abbey church of a growing monastic complex. In the 12th century, the abbot Suger rebuilt portions of the abbey church using innovative structural and decorative features. In doing so, he is said to have created the first truly Gothic building. The basilica's 13th-century nave is also the prototype for the Renaissance Gothic style, and provided an architectural model for cathedrals and abbeys of northern France, England and other countries. The abbey church became a cathedral in 1966 and is the seat of the Bishop of St Denis, Pascal Michel Ghislain d'Ellenoy. Although it is universally known as the Basilica of St Denis, actually the cathedral does not have officially the title of minor basilica granted by the Vatican. Background: St Denis, a patron saint of France, became, according to legend, the first bishop of Paris. Legend relates that he was decapitated on the hill of Montmartre and subsequently carried his head to the site of the current church, indicating where he wanted to be buried. According to related legends, a martyrium was erected on the site of his grave, which became a famous place of pilgrimage during the 5th and 6th centuries. Dagobert's church. Dagobert, the king of the Franks, refounded the church as the Abbey of St Denis, a Benedictine monastery. Dagobert also commissioned a new shrine to house the saint's remains, which was created by his chief counselor, Eligius, a goldsmith by training. An early vita of St Eligius describes the shrine. Above all, Eligius fabricated a mausoleum for the holy martyr Denis in the city of Paris, with a wonderful marble ciborium over it marvelously decorated with golden gems. He composed a crest on a magnificent frontal and surrounded the throne of the altar with golden axes in a circle. He placed golden apples there, round and jeweled. He made a pulpit and a gate of silver and a roof from the throne of the altar on silver axes. He made a covering in the place before the tomb and fabricated an outside altar at the feet of the holy martyr. So much industry did he lavish there, at the king's request, and poured out so much that scarcely a single ornament was left in Gaul, and it is the greatest wonder of all to this very day. None of this work survives. Architecture. The Basilica of St Denis ranks as an architectural landmark, as the first major structure of which a substantial part was designed and built in the Gothic style. Both stylistically and structurally, it heralded the change from Romanesque architecture to Gothic architecture. Before the term Gothic came into common use, it was known as the French style. As it now stands, the church has a large cruciform building of basilica form, that is, it has a central nave with lower aisles and clerestory windows. It has an additional aisle on the northern side formed of a row of chapels. The west front has 3 portals, a rose window and 1 tower on the southern side. The eastern end, which is built over a crypt, is apsidal, surrounded by an ambulatory and a survey of 9 radiating chapels. The basilica retains stained glass of many periods, including exceptional modern glass, and a set of 12 misericords. The basilica measures 108 meters long. The Carolingian Church. Little is known about the earliest buildings on the site. The first church mentioned in the Chronicles was begun in 754 under Pepin the Short and completed under Charlemagne, who was present at its consecration in 775. By 832 the abbey had been granted a remunerative whaling concession on the Cotentin Peninsula. Most of what is now known about the Carolingian Church at St. Denis resulted from a lengthy series of excavations begun under the American art historian Sumner McKnight Crosby in 1937. The building was about 60 meters long, with a monumental westwork, single transepts, a crossing tower and a lengthy eastern apse over a large crypt. According to one of the abbey's many foundation myths, a leper, who was sleeping in the nearly completed church the night before its planned consecration, witnessed a blaze of light from which Christ, accompanied by St. Denis and a host of angels, emerged to conduct the consecration ceremony himself. Before leaving, Christ healed the leper, tearing off his diseased skin to reveal a perfect complexion underneath. A misshapen patch on a marble column was said to be the leper's former skin, which stuck there when Christ discarded it. Fantastical though they may seem now, the popularity of such myths in medieval accounts go some way to explaining why any redevelopment of the original church was a sensitive matter, and why Suger found it necessary to go to such lengths to justify his changes. Having been consecrated by Christ, the fabric of the building was itself regarded as sacred. The early Gothic rebuilding, Abbot Suger, friend and confidant of French kings and Abbot of St. Denis from 1122, began work around 1135 on the rebuild and enlargement of the abbey, to which he had been given as an oblate at the age of 10. In his famous account of the work undertaken during his administration, Suger was careful to explain and justify his decision to rebuild the church, complaining at length about the parlous state of the old structure and its inability to cope with the crowds of pilgrims visiting the shrine of St. Denis, particularly on special days such as the Feast of the Blessed Denis, when the narrowness of the place forced women to run to the altar on the heads of men as, on a pavement, with great anguish and confusion. Suger's fascination with light was not merely aesthetic. Like many French clerics in the 12th century CE, he was a follower of Pseudo-Dionysius the Areopagite, a 6th century mystic who equated the slightest reflection or glint with divine light. When renovated, the St. Denis Basilica included Suger's own words carved in the nave: "For bright is that which is brightly coupled with the bride, and bright is the noble edifice which is pervaded by the new light." It is important to emphasize that Suger was the patron of the rebuilding of St. Denis, but not the architect, as was often assumed in the 19th and early 20th centuries. In fact, it appears that 2 distinct architects, or master masons, were involved in the 12th century changes. Both remain anonymous, but their work can be distinguished on stylistic grounds. The first, who was responsible for the initial work at the western end, favored conventional Romanesque capitals and molding profiles with rich and individualized detailing. His successor, who completed the western facade and upper stories of the narthex, before going on to build the new choir, displayed a more restrained approach to decorative effects, relying on a simple repertoire of motifs, which may have proved more suitable for the lighter Gothic style that he helped to create. First phase, the west front, c. 1135–40. Suger began his rebuilding project at the western end of St Denis, demolishing the old Carolingian westwork, with its single, centrally located door. He extended the old nave westwards by an additional 4 bays and added a massive western narthex, incorporating a new facade and 3 chapels on the first floor level. This new facade, 34 meters wide and 20 meters deep, has 3 portals, the central one larger than those either side, reflecting the relative width of the central nave and lateral aisles. This tripartite arrangement was clearly influenced by the late 11th century facades of the abbey churches of St Etienne and La Trinité, with which it also shared a 3-story elevation and flanking towers. Only the south tower survives, its partner having been dismantled following clumsy repairs in the 1840s. The major innovation in the facade at St Denis is the way the unknown architects have chosen to emphasize the divisions between the different parts, with massive vertical buttress separating the 3 doorways and horizontal string courses and window arcades clearly marking out the divisions. This clear delineation of parts was to influence subsequent west facade designs as a common theme in the development of Gothic architecture and marked a departure from the Romanesque. The rose window at the center of the upper story of the west portal was also innovative and influential, although small circular windows within triangular tympana were common on the west facades of Italian Romanesque churches. This was probably the first example of a rose window within a square frame, which was to become a dominant feature of the Gothic facades of northern France. The overall design of the facade has an obvious resemblance to a Roman city gatehouse, which helps to emphasize the traditional notion of great churches as earthly embodiments of the heavenly city, as described in the Book of Ezekiel. The many influential features of the new facade include the tall, thin statues of Old Testament prophets and kings attached to columns flanking the portals. These were also adopted at the cathedrals of Paris and Chartres, constructed a few years later, and became a feature of almost every Gothic portal thereafter. Above the doorways, the central tympanum was carved with Christ in majesty displaying his wounds with the dead emerging from the tombs below. Scenes from the martyrdom of St Denis were carved above the south portal, while above the north portal was a mosaic, even though this was, as Suger put it, contrary to the modern custom of the original sculpture. Very little remains, most of what is now visible being the result of rather clumsy restoration work in 1839. Some fragments of the original sculptures survive in the collection of the Musée de Cluny. The portals themselves were sealed by gilded bronze doors, ornamented with scenes from Christ's Passion and clearly recording Suger's patronage with the following inscription: "For the glory of the Church, which nurtured and raised him." Suger strove for the glory of the Church, sharing with you what is yours, O martyr Denis. He prays that by your prayers he should become a sharer in paradise. The year when it was consecrated was the 1140th year of the Word. On the lintel below the great tympanum showing the Last Judgment, beneath a carved figure of the kneeling abbot, was inscribed the more modest plea: "Receive, stern judge, the prayers of your sujet. Let me be mercifully numbered among your sheep." Suger's western extension was completed in 1140 and the 3 new chapels in the narthex were consecrated on the 9th of June of that year. Second phase. On completion of the west front, Abbot Suger moved on to the reconstruction of the eastern end, leaving the Carolingian nave in use. He wanted a choir that would be suffused with light. To achieve his aims, Suger's masons drew on the several new elements which evolved or had been introduced to Romanesque architecture. the pointed arch, the ribbed vault, the ambulatory with radiating chapels, the clustered columns supporting ribs springing in different directions, and the flying buttresses which enabled the insertion of large clerestory windows. It was the first time that these features had all been drawn together, and the style evolved radically from the previous Romanesque architecture by the lightness of the structure and the unusually large size of the stained glass windows. Erwin Panofsky argued that Suger was inspired to create a physical representation of the heavenly Jerusalem. However, the extent to which Suger had any aims higher than aesthetic pleasure has been called into doubt by more recent art historians on the basis of Suger's own writings. The new structure was finished and dedicated on June 11, 1144, in the presence of the king. The Abbey of St Denis thus became the prototype for further building in the royal domain of northern France. Through the rule of the Angevin dynasty, the style was introduced to England and spread throughout France, the Low Countries, Germany, Spain, northern Italy and Sicily. Reconstruction of the nave in 1231, Abbot Otto Clement began work on the rebuilding of the Carolingian nave, which remained sandwiched incongruously between Suger's Gothic works to the east and west. Both the nave and the upper parts of Suger's choir were replaced in the Renaissance Gothic style. From the start it appears that Abbot Otto, with the approval of the regent Blanche of Castile and her son, the young King Louis IX, planned for the new nave and its large crossing to have a much clearer focus as the French royal necropolis. The plan was fulfilled in 1264 when the bones of 16 former kings and queens were relocated to new tombs arranged around the crossing, 8 Carolingian monarchs to the south and 8 Capetians to the north. These tombs, featuring lifelike carved recumbent effigies of gizzants lying on raised bases, were badly damaged during the French Revolution, though all but 2 were subsequently restored by Viollet-le-Duc in 1860. The dark Romanesque nave, with its thick walls and small window openings, was rebuilt using the very latest techniques, in what is now known as Renaissance Gothic. This new style, which differed from Suger's earlier works as much as they had differed from the Romanesque precursors, reduced the wall area to an absolute minimum. Solid masonry was replaced with vast window openings filled with brilliant stained glass and interrupted only by the most slender of bar tracery, not only in the clerestory but also, perhaps for the first time, in the normally dark triforium level. The upper facades of the 2 much enlarged transepts were filled with 2 spectacular 12 meters wide rose windows. As with Suger's earlier rebuilding work, the identity of the architect or master mason remains unknown, although often attributed to Pierre de Montreuil. The only evidence for his involvement is an unrelated document of 1247 which refers to him as a mason from St Denis. The Valois Mortuary Chapel, a plan of circa 1700 by Fay-Libyan, shows the Valois Chapel, a large mortuary chapel in the form of a domed colonnaded rotunda, adjoining the north transept of the basilica and containing the tomb of the Valois. St Denis and the French Revolution. The French Revolution of 1789 ended the might of the St Denis Abbey. The abbey, a symbol of the royals, was completely demolished in 1792. Only the church was left standing. The revolutionaries also severely damaged the church's sculptures, interior and graves. Fortunately, the many sepulchral monuments had been safely stowed away. The church was restored in the mid-19th century by Viollet-le-Duc, the same architect responsible for the restoration of the Cathedral of Norodom. Burial site. The abbey is where the kings of France and the families were buried for centuries and is therefore often referred to as the royal necropolis of France. All but three of the monarchs of France from the 10th century until 1789 have the remains here. Some monarchs, like Clovis I, were not originally buried at this site. The remains of Clovis I were exhumed from the despoiled abbey of St Genevieve, which he founded. The abbey church contains some fine examples of cadaver tombs. The effigies of many of the kings and queens are on the tombs, but their bodies were removed during the French Revolution. The ancient monarchs were removed in August 1793 to celebrate the Revolutionary Festival of Reunion. Then the Bourbon and Valois monarchs were removed to celebrate the execution of Marie Antoinette in October 1793. The bodies were dumped into 3 trenches and covered with lime to destroy them. Archaeologist Alexandre Lenoir saved many of the monuments by claiming them as artworks for his Museum of French Monuments. The bodies of several Plantagenet monarchs of England were likewise removed from Fontevraud Abbey during the French Revolution. Napoleon Bonaparte reopened the church in 1806, but left the royal remains in the mass graves. In 1817 the restored Bourbons ordered the mass graves to be opened, but only portions of 3 bodies remained intact. The remaining bones from 158 bodies were collected into an ossuary in the crypt of the church behind marble plates bearing the names Bourbon crypt. The bodies of the beheaded King Louis XVI, his wife Marie Antoinette of Austria, and his sister Madame Elizabeth were not initially buried in St Denis, but rather in the churchyard of the Madeleine, where they were covered with quicklime. The body of the Dauphin, who died of an illness, was buried in an unmarked grave in a Parisian churchyard near the temple. During Napoleon's exile in Elba, the restored Bourbons ordered a search for the corpses of Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette. The few remains, a few bones that were presumably the king's, and a clump of greyish matter containing a lady's garter, were found on January 21, 1815, brought to St Denis and buried in the new Bourbon crypt. King Louis XVIII, upon his death in 1824, was buried in the centre of the crypt, near the graves of Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette. The coffins of royal family members who died between 1815 and 1830 were also placed in the vaults, under the direction of architect Viollet-le-Duc, famous for his work on Notre-Dame de Paris. Church monuments that had been taken to the Museum of French Monuments were returned to the church. The corpse of King Louis VII, who had been buried at the abbey at St Pont and whose tomb had not been touched by the revolutionaries, was brought to St Denis and buried in the crypt. In 2004 the mummified heart of the Dauphin, the boy who would have been Louis XVII, was sealed into the wall of the crypt. Burials. Kings. All but 3 of the kings of France are buried in the basilica, as well as a few other monarchs. The remains of the earlier monarchs were removed from the destroyed abbey of St Genevieve. Some of the prominent of these are Clovis I, Childebert I, Aragon, Fredegond, Dagobert I, Clovis II, Charles Martel, Pippin the Younger and his wife Bertrade of Valois, Carloman I, King of the Franks, Charles the Bald and his wife Ermentrude of Orleans, Carloman, Robert II the Pious and Constance of Arles, Henry I, Louis VI, Louis VII and Constance of Castile, Philip II Augustus, Louis IX, Charles I of Naples, King of the Two Sicilies. An effigy covers his heart burial. Philip III the Bold, Philip IV the Fair and his mother Isabella of Aragon, Leo V of Armenia, Louis XII of France, Francis I, Henry II and Catherine de' Medici, Francis II, Charles IX, Henry III, also King of Poland, Henry IV, Louis XIII, Louis XIV, Louis XV, Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette. Louis XVII, Louis XVIII. Other royalty and nobility: Blanche of France, Nicholas Henry, Duke of Orleans, son of Henry IV, Gaston, Duke of Orleans, son of Henry IV, Marie de Bourbon, Duchess of Montpensier, wife of Gaston, Marguerite of Lorraine, Duchesses of Orleans and second wife of Gaston, Anne-Marie Louise d'Orléans, La Grande Mademoiselle, Marguerite Louise d'Orléans, Grand Duchess of Tuscany, Jean-Gaston d'Orléans, Duke of Valois, Marie Anne d'Orléans, Mademoiselle de Chartres, Henrietta Maria of France, wife of Charles I of Scotland and England, Philippe, Duke of Orleans, brother of Louis XIV, Princess Henrietta of England, first wife of Philippe, Elizabeth Charlotte of the Palatinate, second wife of Philippe, Maria Theresa of Spain, consort of Louis XIV, Louis of France, Le Grand Dauphin, Maria Anna Victoria of Bavaria, Dauphin of France, wife of Louis, Princess Anne Elizabeth of France, daughter of Louis XIV, Princess Marie Anne of France, daughter of Louis XIV, Marie-Thérèse of France, daughter of Louis XIV, Philippe Charles, Duke of Anjou, son of Louis XIV, Louis François of France, Duke of Anjou, son of Louis XIV, Philippe II, Duke of Orleans, Regent of France, Louise of France, Duke of Burgundy, Marie Adélaïde of Savoy, Duchess of Burgundy, Louise of France, Duke of Brittany, Louis of France, Duke of Brittany, Charles of France, Duke of Berry, Marie-Louise Elizabeth d'Orléans, Duchess of Berry, Delancon, Charles Delancon, Duke of Alençon, Marie-Louise Elizabeth Delancon, Marie Leszczyńska, consort of Louis XV, Louise Elizabeth of France, Duchesses of Parma, Henriette of France, daughter of Louis XV and twin of the above, Louise of France, daughter of Louis XV, Louise of France, Dauphin of France, Infanta Maria Theresa Raffaella of Spain, first wife of above, Maria Josepha of Saxony, second wife of Louis Philippe of France, Duke of Anjou, Princess Marie Adélaïde of France, daughter of Louis XV, Princess Victoire of France, daughter of Louis XV, Princess Sophie of France, daughter of Louis XV, Princess Louise of France, daughter of Louis XV, Louis Joseph, Dauphin of France, first son of Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, Princess Sophie Hélène Béatrice of France, second daughter of Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, Henry de la Tour d'Auvergne, Vicomte de Turenne, Maréchal General de France, Anne of Brittany, Duchess of Brittany, Gallery,